we're exploring all options and we're open for business. And optionality is good, and we're vetting through all of them. I think it's fair to say I've received a lot of phone calls, a lot of interest. People understand the direction of the Big 12, and we're exploring those levels of interest. Nothing is imminent, but we're working hard to make sure that we position the Big 12 in the best possible way on a go-forward basis.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Talking College Football. I'm your host, Phillip Jordan from Last World College Football, 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I'm the in-studio host and producer, Dothan Woods Football. That voice you heard at the top of the show was new Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, and he was talking about how the Big 12 is open for business. And that audio comes from the Big 12 YouTube channel. And that's what we're going to be talking about on today's podcast with the guest. Josh Neighbors from Locked On Big 12 will be joining me. We'll be talking how the Big 12 is open for business. We'll talk about the new commissioner, Brett Yormark, altogether, his thoughts on the hiring, what he can do for the conference, and where he can take the conference. And we'll also jump in who are the elite teams in the Big 12, who could be some surprising teams, who are the teams that could win the conference. It's really a wide open conference. You look at the Big 10, you say, okay, that's Ohio State and pretty much everybody else. You look at SEC, it's Alabama, Georgia, and then you got Texas A&M probably in the third spot there. But when you look at the Big 12, it's pretty wide open, really. At the top, Oklahoma State, Baylor, Oklahoma. But he's got two teams he also likes that could compete for a Big 12 title. I'm going to throw it out there. I think Baylor will repeat. I'm going to go with that. I like their roster. I know they got to replace some skill position players and quarterback. I just like what Dave Aranda's got going there, but the schedule's a little bit tougher. But I wouldn't be shocked Oklahoma State wins the conference or Oklahoma as well. So it's going to be very interesting. Then after my conversation with Josh, we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about, day one of SEC Media Days. Talk about all that and some college football headlines. Let you guys know, and I'll mention this later in the show as well. This is only podcast this week. I'm only doing one this week. That's why it's longer. I try to keep these things around 30 minutes, as I told you guys before. So won't be one this week, only one this week, but next week I'll do back to 3. There'll be a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday podcast. Monday will be solo. The Wednesday podcast, I will be joined by Adam Spencer from Saturday Down South. We're going to talk about the SEC, what SEC Media is going this week. Try to get somebody on at some point next week to talk ACC. And then the following week, we'll kind of jump into some Big 10. We got somebody scheduled, lined up for that one. And perhaps Pac-12. We'll see how the show goes, and then probably after that get back into some team previews as we get ready, get geared up, get ramped up for the college football season. But before we talk about all that good stuff, let you guys know you can find me and the podcast. You can find me on social media at PJordanSEC. The podcast is available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcast. You can find Talking College Football. Remember, you can email me at sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com. Now, let's chat with today's guest, Josh Neighbors from Locked On Big 12. Everybody joining me on the show today is Josh Neighbors. You can check him out over on Locked On Big 12, Monday through Friday, every single day. Also some other stuff, Locked On Nationals for the baseball fans out there, producer, Sirius XM for college sports, and also Spiders Baseball, Richmond Spiders on ESPN Plus, more baseball stuff. So Josh, you're all over the place. A lot of different titles out there, but I appreciate you coming on the show and talk some Big 12 football.
Yeah, this is the one. Well, the Nationals one's been pretty busy recently, but I would say, yeah, ever since the USC UCLA thing, like it Big 12 kind of nonstop realignment scenarios. You know how this stuff goes with college football.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a difference a year makes with the Big 12. At this time last year, and I'm sure we'll get into it, they were kind of probably feeling how a lot of people in the Pac-12 feeling, oh no, their conference is dead. You know, the two big teams are left, but really, you know, Bowlesby did a good job bringing in teams that are coming in to the conference. Yes, Oklahoma, Texas, are leaving, but they're actually in a pretty good spot. You know, after the SEC to Big 10 stuff, they're in a pretty good position actually when you really look at it from where they were a year ago.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the difference a year makes, and I would say that, like to just kind of illustrate that. I mean, I was like fearful about like, will I have a job? Because I work a lot on the Big 12 side of things. During the summer months for Sirius XM, I'm all over the place. But right now, during football season and basketball season and in the spring, I'm all normally Big 12 all the time. And so, I'm fearful for my job, and I'm sure a lot of people were, and I'm sure a lot of people in the Pac-12 are dealing with like that anxiety right now. So, but Big 12 Media Days last week, like it's like the Big 12's, hunting now. Like they're the ones actually going after teams, and yeah, it might come at the expense of the Pac-12, but it is a stark contrast from where we were sitting last year.
Yeah, with Big 12 Media Days, of course, the one thing jumped out to me was, I guess, for the Big 12 fans, they got officially, unofficially, I don't know how you want to term it, new commissioner, Brett Yormark. He's not officially the commissioner till the 1st, but he really felt like he was the commissioner watching his press conference there at Media Days. I know he had made the line, I think, that's been running around, open for business. Just overall, actually, before that, what were your initial thoughts on the hire him? Obviously, an outside-the-box hire, a guy not involved in college athletics from Rock Nation, been in NASCAR, like I said, not a college guy. So what was your initial response or reaction to him when it got announced he was going to be the new commissioner?
So, obviously, like I was glad that it was not a traditional college person, because that's not what the conference needs at this point. I thought the NASCAR and Rock Nation combination was really interesting, just because. So if you follow NASCAR at all, and I follow it relatively close, not as close as NASCAR's got awesome fans, but he was around when they had the deal for them to, I forget which, I'm forgetting now what it was. It was one of the cups. It was a Cup Series sponsorship that he basically was there for. I want to say, I forget if it was Sprint or not, but like that's a big deal. And then for him to go into the Rock Nation, that's now not a talent agency for both music and also for sports as well. He's got experience in that realm, and to kind of transition to like Big 12 Media Days, I was really happy when he made the comment that he's like, I'm a pretty casual fan. Like I've seen the Big 12 from afar. He was not going to sit there and lie to us and say, I'm a huge fan of the atmosphere at McLean Stadium on Saturdays, or, I love the way Allen Fieldhouse feels, on a big Saturday night game or big Monday night game. Like I actually appreciate the fact that he wasn't that, and he's not there for that. He's not, eventually, sure, his job will be to sell those kinds of things. But, like, his job is to find as many ways possible to make this conference better off financially. That's why he was hired. That's why they brought him in. And he knows that, and I think the people who brought him in know that. So I'm excited. I was intrigued by it, and then I'm even more excited when I heard him speak about it. I know he talked in generalities, but his honesty about, his relationship to the conference previous is what most caught my ear.
Yeah, and listen to his statements, and a lot of the answers to his question, he talked a lot about business and the Big 12 brand. And in your opinion, put you in that seat, guy that covers this conference. Yeah. What is the Big 12 brand now, and what do you think it should be going forward?
Well, part of the brand, I mean, I think the one thing I can sell you for sure is it's the best basketball conference in the country. The last 3 years, there has been a different Big 12 team in the last 3 national championship games, right? They have had Texas Tech, who was, just very, 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 very close to winning the title against UVA. Baylor obviously did it in pretty impressive fashion, beating what we thought was a juggernaut in Gonzaga. It turns out the Baylor Bears were the juggernaut that year, and they were all season. And then Kansas wins it in 2022. And I think there's a pretty good argument that in 2020, the Jayhawks probably would have been the team there to beat them.
Absolutely.
To win that season. So that's the brand currently. I think also being the most competitive conference is something that's really interesting to me. It's going to be a really competitive league. It 100% is. Now, yeah, they don't have the brands that everybody else has. I'm not going to try to sell anybody a whole bill of goods about that. But the thing is, like, it's a really competitive league, and it's got good. Like Oklahoma State's been good forever. They've been good for a long time. Baylor, think about the last 3 or 4 coaches. Well, I know Jim Grobe kind of notwithstanding here, like. Art Briles, Matt Rule, and Dave Aranda have all won at a really high level at Baylor. You can win 10, 11 games there, and you can compete for championships with Baylor. So you think about that. You think about the fact they're adding a team in Cincinnati. It's been a playoff team. And then BYU is one of the best independent brands out there because of obviously their religious affiliation. They have a national fan base. Houston's in one of the largest markets in the entire country. UCF, obviously, everybody knows about their fictional national championship and all those kind of things. But still, it's like they have like they're adding these intriguing brands on top of what is already a pretty competitive league. And I think that is something that they can sell. And also we saw today that that NBC has interest in boosting their overall TV package as Notre Dame plus the Big 12, which I think is super interesting, right? I think the idea of like Fox has the Big 10, the ESPN's got the ACC and the SEC, but really the SEC is what they care about. I think in the end of the day, I mean, they've got a great deal with the ACC, but don't get me wrong, it's an excellent deal for ESPN.
Yeah.
But I think it's really, I think it's really interesting that the NBC is like, all right, what if we did the Big 12 plus Notre Dame? And I kind of really like the idea. So like the fact that they're being considered to be in the mix for something like that shows you kind of where the league is at, because people do want to watch. People do want to watch. I mean, there's a reason why Big Monday is full of, it's Big 12 teams, right? Fox, a lot of their games, a lot of their noon games, Big 12 games. So It's not just the Big 10. So it's a product out there that people do want to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the open for business comment he made, that had that wasn't just a one meaning, phrase he put out there. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, we're open for business. We'll bring on teams." And I feel like it has so many different layers, and that right there, TV contracts. I mean, that's a big thing now. I mean, and let's face it, the SEC expanding, the Big 10 expanding. Yes, it's about super conference. It's about TV contracts, TV money. And then there you go. And I really you add those 4 teams, as you mentioned, Cincinnati, BYU, UCF, Houston. That's a fun conference to watch on Saturdays. Because those are teams traditionally are known for good offenses. And quarterback play. I mean, traditionally, whoever the coaches are. And who doesn't want to watch that on Saturday? I mean, the SEC, Big 10, they're going to do their thing. But those teams in the Big 12 with what you already have. And look, I'm just going to throw it out there. I want to get your thoughts. I think it will be funny if Colorado has to go back into the Big 12 after they had left. I'm sure you've talked about that, but that's also funny Simon, if that happens, if the Pac-12 teams come over.
I think, like, culturally speaking, I guess they do more fit with, like, the Pac-12. I guess you could actually did a whole thing about the cultural stuff today. But, like, maybe what's better off for them is being in a conference that's rooted in Texas. Because and here's what I so I actually got to work on the Pac-12 channel a really decent amount the last year. And people always say that when like Colorado is good, it's like a really awesome atmosphere. And look, we know that from the Big 12 days. So I actually think them getting back to a place, where they're playing 2-3 games a year in the state of Texas, right? And be able to kind of you can resell that, right? If you're recruiting in Texas and you can say, Mom and Dad, you get to come watch them 3-4 times a year in addition to, in your backyard, in addition to when you come to Denver. Also, Denver is an hour, less than an hour. It's like an hour. What is it? Whatever it is. To Boulder. Like it's not that hard of a sell. So maybe they belong back in the Big 12. I actually think it's going to be something that's really, really exciting. But I'll tell you, the teams I'm targeting, it's really been Oregon and Washington. Like, if they could pull that off, it'd be such a coup. Those are 2 teams with such good branding and in great Washington's in a great market, and Oregon is obviously the Nike college football school. If they could pull that off, it'd be fantastic. But I also think part of the expansion things too is now, like, the Pac-12 can't go grab any 4 of those teams. They were against BYU before, but now they definitely reconsider that. But they can't because the Big 12 has them. And so I think also it's a little bit of keep away too. The Big 12 is in a good spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like, and if anybody's watching this as a Pac-12 fan, I'm sorry. You may hurt feelings, but I think the Pac-12 is they're done. I mean, that's just my opinion. I mean, eventually those teams are going to go somewhere else. And it was interesting his response about Oklahoma, Texas. He you couldn't take not interesting. I feel like you couldn't get a read whether he wants to, hey, I can take advantage that they're still here till 2025, or let's hurry up and get these 2 out of here and let's move forward. What was your read on his comments on that?
Well, so I'll tell you what's really interesting now is I think at worst the USC UCLA thing doesn't hurt the Big 12 at all. At best, it actually could help them get more money out of OU and Texas. Think about it like this: the Fox is going to have the full complement of Big 10 teams in 2024, right? Mm-hmm. Well, OU and Texas aren't set to leave until 2025. If Mickey Mouse, Disney, and ESPN wants the SEC product to be the full new 16-team SEC, maybe they have a bit more impetus to front some money to help those schools get out of there. And maybe it's a better financial deal, because here's the thing with them in the conference, the league distributed like $45 million, something like that last year to all of its teams. It's really good. And the Big 12 will do good business as long as those two teams are in the league. But it might be better business to let them out early if the SEC and ESPN is so inclined to do so. So I think he's open to anything, and he's been at it. He all of his comments were, if it helps the conference, if it helps the conference, if it helps the conference. Well, if OU and Texas pay a sum of money that's going to make sure that your schools continue to eat and eat at a pretty good rate, like take the money, right? Take the money and distribute that money. I just think it's a matter of what's the right number. But I think ESPN definitely more motivated now that it's all but a foregone conclusion. We're going to hear about this Fox deal with the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I just feel like this would be the perfect week for any conference to put out a big news story if they could trump SEC media days, because the whole conference war thing, that would be a big deal. When you look at this season, 2022 season, it feels like there's three top teams here. It's Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Oklahoma. Do you see it that way with this? Is it like a 3-team race probably going into the season, or do you see maybe there's a 4th team that can jump into that conversation?
I think there are 5 teams this year that can win the Big 12. Okay. It is the 3 you listed, Texas and Kansas State. So Texas has all the talent in the world in their offense. It's the most talented offense by far in the conference. It's actually not very close. It's just a matter of I think people have been burned by Texas so many times they're afraid to pick them. And what I'll say about this year is their amount of talent this year on offense is so overwhelming that in this particular year in the Big 12, they're going to have an advantage. This is not last year's Big 12 defensively, I don't think. And, the offenses actually don't, I think this is a weird transition year. Think about Baylor's transitioning a little bit. They lost a lot of last year's team, but they should still be really good. Oklahoma State is definitely transitioning. Oklahoma is definitely transitioning. Yeah. And so that kind of, those are the top dogs. And so it kind of leaves everything in flux. Well, Sark's got a really good offense there. And the defense, a lot of questions there. They got a lot of guys coming back. Let's see if they get better. But I think they're involved. And then Kansas State had the most first-team selections of any school in the Big 12. They had 6. The question for them is, can Adrian Martinez, not be – he's got to be – he can't be the guy who was at Nebraska. He's got to take care of the football, man. He's really got to take care of the football. That's what the best Kansas State quarterbacks and those Skylar Thompson, not known for 300-yard passing games, 100-yard rushing games, known for taking care of the football, making really good decisions. And that's what they need this year. I feel like this would have been the perfect year to have Skylar Thompson back, for his final year. It sucks it was 1 year earlier. But can they turn Adrian Martinez into that guy? And their rushing offense is going to be awesome with him and Deuce Vaughn together. It's going to be one of the more interesting quarterback-running back duos running the football that we see in all of college football.
Yeah, and if Adrian Martinez turns out to be good at Kansas State, Nebraska fans will be like, what were you doing, Scott Frost?
Yeah,
what in the world were you doing?
Right.
And with Texas, it feels like with them, it all hinges on, Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
Can he be what, he's been built up to be? And obviously a little pressure on him because who's coming in a few years, and he doesn't have his free transfer anymore. So he needs to, show what he's capable of doing. But, for you, especially offense, last year they averaged over 35 points per game, but still the quarterback position was inconsistent. Mm-hmm. Hudson Card got benched after Arkansas. Then you go to Casey Thompson. He was okay.
They played back. They were back and forth, those guys, all year long too.
So, obviously, quarterback's always big, but just for them, it just seems like it all hinges on that for them.
Yeah, there's no excuse. The offensive line plays bad. That'll be a huge problem. It'll be noticeable. But there's no excuse for him not to be good. Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson behind him. People don't understand how good of a back Roschon Johnson is. I'm a huge fan of his, but he would start on 7 of the 10 teams in this conference. He's just behind the best running back. Last year, the Kansas State game, go back and watch it if anybody hasn't watched it. He ran for 130 yards. Bijan didn't play. He went out and just ran for 130 yards and I think 1 or 2 touchdowns. And, he's the reason why they won that game. They got those 2 in the backfield. They also have Jaleel Billingsley coming over from Alabama. They also have Jai Hall coming over from Alabama. They've got Jordan Whittington back. They've got Xavier Worthy. They've got Isaiah Nair, who I think is going to be a really interesting piece for them because he's just a go down the field and get it guy, a high. He's a he's a jump ball type guy. Like that's what he is. He's low reception, high output type guy. So they've got everything you want. Like you can throw screen passes to your wide receivers, to your running backs. You can even throw them to your tight ends. I mean, they've got it all. So my question is like, all right, Quinn Ewers, are you up for it? Now, my thing is this too, like he could get better as the year goes along. Like we can't discount that, right? Maybe it doesn't look good in September and October. And maybe in November they're like a machine, but the record should be where it is. So I think that's the interesting thing to watch is like, what does it look like? Like, does he look like a guy who's just a world beater from the word go? Or I remember last year, people were calling for, I'm totally blanking on now, Ohio State quarterback, CJ Stroud. Mm-hmm. People were calling for his head after the Minnesota game. Yep. And then there was the game where Jack Miller played earlier in the year. People wanted him to be the quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, guys, just sometimes you got to give it some time. Like sometimes you got to give it some time. And so I'm wondering if it's one of those situations where, look, maybe you take a couple losses, but like in late October, early November, like they're a team that's better than whenever they're ranked, or maybe they're not ranked at all, and it feels like they're a team that's playing really well.
That Alabama game second week could be a big. You could. Jesus. No one's going to expect Texas to win that game. Everybody will expect Alabama. Which look, I'm in Alabama. That's where I live at. All these Alabama fans fussing about having to get up early and watch an 11 o'clock kickoff. I'm like, you guys do know Fox has the game. They put their biggest game at 11 our time. So just chill out.
The highest rated game last year, I forget which game it was. It was one of their games at noon. I'm not so sure it was Ohio State, Michigan, whatever. But like, there's a reason. It sucks. I hate it too. It's gonna be 90 million degrees. Like, that game should not be played at that time. Nobody thinks it should. But like, you have to understand why Fox is doing it.
Yeah, but if Texas plays well in that game, doesn't even win. If they win, it's just there'll be probably questions on Monday about what's going on in Tuscaloosa, right? And Bryce Young and that group. But how big can that game be? You think for Texas? Can that be one that said, okay, we play well? If we play well here, we know kind of what we are going forward through the conference. Yeah,
it's like I'm hoping they don't get killed because because that might like mess up their confidence, right?
Yeah,
like you don't want that kind of thing to just like completely put them in a funk and derail them. But here's the thing: when you go to the SEC, like you're gonna have to deal with that, right? Like there are, unless you're, there are some games. I mean, I went to Mizzou, so like I see it all the time. Like, all right, can you make sure that Georgia throttling you doesn't affect you next week? And like for the Missouris and South Carolinas of the world, like they kind of learn how to do that. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, we have to refocus. We've got Vanderbilt, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But like, I think that's gonna be a super interesting test to see, like, all right, not even what happens in that game, but like what happens after that. Like, if you get 42-10, do you let 42-10 carry into the next week and the next week and the next week? Like, that's kind of my question. So yeah, I mean, everybody's gonna be watching that game. It's gonna do bonkers ratings. I'm pumped for it, but tempered optimism, I guess, for Texas fans.
Yeah, we're going to wonder what Sark can do against Saban.
Yeah.
Saban, hey, that shine came off of him last year. He had 2 losses against 2 former assistants. And
yeah, it did. That's true. That is true.
And Jimbo and Kirby, which this is an interesting week anyways. I'm just going to throw Jimbo is the last guy at SEC Media Days, but that's a different topic, a different time.
Right.
This conference quarterback, there's some good players here, but it doesn't feel like there's that superstar. I know Spencer Sanders there at Oklahoma State. He is the most tenured quarterback.
My guy, Spencer Sanders.
Yeah, I know he's had some issues with the turnovers. I mean, the turnover bug has got him. I'm very intrigued with Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma. I think he can be where we talked about Texas. Baylor, Chapin's going to be Chapin's going to be the quarter. Some names I struggle with. I don't know why I want to put a Sharp because he looked really sharp in the Big 12
Championship game the first half. Yes,
that's how you recover. That's how you recover when you make a mistake. A lot of interesting guys. Okay, so and then JT Daniels, if he can stay healthy, which is a big if with him. He's good when he's on the field, which is very rare. So when you look at what is the state of the quarterbacks in this conference?
So I love Spencer Sanders because I think he's like seriously talented, and I think that Notre Dame game was showing like what he can be. I voted Dylan Gabriel on my ballot for first team all Big 12. I think he's the better quarterback, like more complete product. I mean, this is a guy who's got like 3 more years of eligibility, but has put in like 2 complete, really awesome seasons at UCF. And also Jeff Lebby, he's got a really good relationship with him. and he knows him well, like from their time at UCF together. So this is something that I think is going to work really well. Spencer Sanders, it's more on him this year. Like there is no Jalen Warren. There's no Tay Martin. It's going to be more of his team, and he's going to be the one creating things and also taking care of the football while doing so. So the challenge is fall on him. I'm excited about that. West Virginia is crazy to me because there's so much there's a lot of pressure on Neil Brown, I think. People are saying yes, no, but he is an offensive-minded coach who gave up play calling to Graham Harrell, and they're bringing in a guy like JT Daniels. And so, that's a proud program, and they want to be better than they are, really bad. I mean, everybody wants to be better than they are, but like they've had some heydays, and they're not near that. And so I think Neil Brown's a good coach, and I'm really curious on that front. Blake Shapen, I mean, there's a reason why he's replacing Gary Bohan. He's just got more ability. He might also be one of those guys where like he has to come along slowly, because I think they're going to want that offense to maybe carry him a bit more than it did last year. And so I think that's going to take time for a guy who hasn't been a starter before. So that's really interesting. Quarterback spot, obviously Quinn Ewers, you mentioned before. Adrian Martinez is really interesting. Tell you what, a team I want to look at, Texas Tech, they got 3 guys who are really good there. Baron Morton was one of the best recruits they've had. Tyler Shuck came from Oregon. Last year, he had the 7th best odds to be the number 1 pick going into the year. Which is like nuts. And, people might be like, I don't even know who Tyler Shuck is. Well, that just tells you kind of intangibles he has. And then Donovan Smith, who was really impressive last year and has a little bit of, I'll just say a little bit of Patrick Mahomes in the game, Donovan Smith. And he had some really good games. So they got 3 really good quarterbacks. And also they have a star and offensive coordinator in Zach Kitley. So this league is not refined at the quarterback spot. It's just really interesting at the quarterback spot.
Yeah, and I really feel like when the season's over, we're going to have some superstars. As the season goes on, some superstars will rise up. So you mentioned some teams you think could win. I mentioned the 3 at the top, which I think everybody mentions, and you brought up Kansas State and Texas as potential contenders for the Big 12. Who do you think wins this conference this year?
So I picked Oklahoma. I'm a traitor to the league. I picked OU in Texas in the championship game. So it's like as much as I love, but here's the thing: is my whole point is if like a catastrophic offseason for OU is losing Lincoln Riley and you replace him with Brent Venables, who's considered one of the best coordinators, probably the best coordinator that was out there, and then you bring in Jeff Lebby. He brings in, the best coordinator, brought in maybe the other best coordinator of college football last year, and they bring in a quarterback like Dylan Gabriel. Like, you're probably going to be okay. And also, from what I'm hearing, like they're practicing stuff they didn't do before. They lost a lot on defense last year, but that defense wasn't impressive a whole lot. Like they didn't tackle very well. And I can't think that we're going to see a Brent Venables defense like a year or 2 from now. It's like, well, you know what? Brent's defense can't tackle. Like that's not going to happen. Like at the bare minimum, they're going to do things like that. Now the offensive line, a little bit down last year. Bill Beambo, we'll see, what happens there. But like that group's probably going to come around, and I'm really curious to see what they look like this year. Maybe not as much talent on offense as normal, but they've got a really good leader, a guy people believe in. So the offensive line's at, and they've got some weapons. So I'm curious, but I think they're going to be in fine shape. So OU and then Texas, I'll buy it this year. It's everybody says do it every single year, but I'm like, this is a different level of talent, and this league's kind of down this year. So I think Texas takes advantage of that.
Well, the Big 12 fans may not appreciate that pick, but any SEC fans will love it. We'll love it. So,
there you go.
Anyways, so it's going to be an interesting year to Big 12. I'm going to be intrigued how it goes because I feel like there's not a head and shoulders favorite. So it should be a fun conference to keep up with this college football season. And Josh, this also has been fun having you on the show, talking all things Big 12 football. If the listeners or viewers wanted to follow you online, where can they find you and where can they listen to Locked On Big 12?
Yeah, you guys can find the show wherever you guys get your podcasts, and you can find us on YouTube as well. Subscribe, leave comments, your hate, your love. We'll take it all, and we'll turn it into content.
All right, there you go. Well, anyways, Josh, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to doing it again sometime down the road. Enjoyed it. Thanks so much. And thanks again to Josh Neighbors from Locked On Big 12 for coming on today's show. Please go check out his podcast. Does a great job keeping you up to date on all things Big 12 sports every day, all year long. Now, the SEC Media Days kicked off on Monday. Of course, this podcast releasing on Tuesday. But this is the only podcast this week as I will stay in the open. So the rest of the SEC Media Day coverage will be on Monday's podcast and also the ACC Media Days as well. So Monday, I'm going solo. It will just be me talking about SEC Media Days, ACC Media Days, and any other big college football news that happens between now and then, which just is a Tuesday. So there's probably plenty that's going to come out and to discuss on Monday's podcast. But what I did want to do was talk about some stuff that was said on day one of SEC Media Days, which featured Commissioner Greg Sankey, new LSU coach Brian Kelly, Lane Kiffin of Ole Miss, and Eli Drinkwitz of Missouri. Interesting stuff. I would say Eli Drinkwitz was probably the least interesting person that spoke, so I don't have a lot of notes, a lot of things on him. But I'm going to go over just some quick stuff I just gathered and that stood out to me what was said. Well, Greg Sankey really didn't talk a lot about the SEC. He talked more about where he sees or where he thinks the college football should go nationally. It was more the national topics that we're dealing with. Now, SEC-wise, he did talk about a single division schedule when the league does become a 16-team conference, which that makes the most sense to me. And having a better way of rotating opponents. So, and he said this, it's not 12 years after you visited one place. So, say if Alabama plays at Florida, it's not going to be another 12 years before that happens. Obviously, the conversation number of games, 8 or 9. I think the teams that want to keep it at 8 are the ones that know they need those 4 extra games, easy non-conference opponents to get to a bowl game. I'm not going to say which teams, but there are some in the conference. I'm all for a 9-game conference schedule. He even joked about a 10-game conference schedule, which we saw can work in the COVID year in 2020. Obviously, like I just said, impact on bowl eligibility was something that talked about and figured out tie-breaking because you're going to have 16 teams. There's no divisions. How do you decide? So those are some things that stood out to me there with Greg Sankey on that. He also said it doesn't feel pressure to expand the conference, that they're pretty much, I think he really said they're good where they're at, but I also feel like he said it without saying if we need to and it's the right situation, we'll expand. And he really talked about how he likes how the SEC is in the southeastern quadrant of the country, which I feel like was kind of like maybe a slight or a shot at the Big Ten, pulling in USC and UCLA because obviously they're not in the quadrant. I mean, that is still, maybe not from a football and basketball standpoint, but still the other sports. That is an interesting deal they're going to have going there. He just talked about evaluating the landscape. Kind of touched on the college football playoff stuff a little bit. Talked about how he would have been okay with 8 if there's no automatic qualifiers. Really, it sounds like to me he's not for automatic qualifiers. You just earn your way in, either top 8, top 4, top 12. That he talked about how the SEC has always been a super conference, and that they are one. That they're not trying to become one. They are one. I mean, he really pointed a lot of stuff at there needs to be some changes, and he really kind of showed everybody, I think, why he is the top commissioner in college athletics. Greg Sankey went up there. He really showed great leadership. I think he really just put stuff out there. And I was very intrigued by his comments. Then the first coach was Brian Kelly, new LSU head coach. Talked about the 4 quarterbacks. The spring was basically a place for them to lay down the offense, not really the quarterback competition. With Jaden Daniels, especially if you just watch the spring game, you're not getting a good idea of what he is because we all know spring games, you can't really run the quarterback because you're not really tackling the quarterback. He did talk about his quarterbacks. They have got to get the ball to the playmakers, which LSU does have that. Tremendous receivers. They have talent all over the field. And that they also need to make plays themselves. He said his offensive line, that's an area he wants to keep his eye on going forward, which, that doesn't matter if your offensive line is not going to play well. Those quarterbacks can't get the ball to those playmakers, and also, at the same time, they can't make plays themselves. But he did say he likes the depth at quarterback, and they really got that when Miles Brennan, most experienced SEC quarterback here. Garrett Nussmeier was the best in the spring, in the LSU spring game. Of course, you got Jaden Daniels and you got Walker Howard, who's a freshman. You don't expect to see him playing. I feel like Miles Brennan's the way to go with this. But like I said, Nussmeier played well, and Jaden Daniels gives you something different with his run ability. I think it was interesting people brought up FSU, and I actually had forgot about this, that the whole Notre Dame and Florida State played last year to start the season. And that was a tremendous game. Florida State almost won. That was just, Florida State just had some issues. We'll get into Florida State next week when we'll talk about the ACC here on the show. But he's going to use that film. Obviously, there's different players as there is with everybody, but kind of use the Notre Dame film against Florida State to kind of get an idea of what they need to do against the Noles when they do play to kick off this season, which will be a pretty cool Sunday night thing. He did talk about the Southern accent thing. Of course, you had to feel like somebody was going to bring that up, but really interesting seeing Brian Kelly. He had not been at a media day situation since 2009 when he was still in Cincinnati because, of course, Notre Dame's independent. They're not a conference, so they don't have to worry about media day. But very interesting, very intrigued, some interesting things. That's just a couple things with Brian Kelly that stood out to me when he went to the podium on Monday. The second coach up was Lane Kiffin, which he said something about not wearing a tie and that Commissioner Sankey wanted to see somebody not wear a tie, and maybe he won't wear a tie. It was just the funny exchange he had there. He answered 2 or 3 questions about Nick Saban. The first one was on trick plays and how did Nick Saban feel about trick plays with Lane Kiffin running trick plays in his offense. He said, he quoted Kirby Smart, he said, you come up here, get all these people, and the first question you get asked is about Nick Saban, which just shows the power of Nick Saban, the greatest coach of all time in college football, in my opinion. But you get asked about Jackson Dart, which that's going to be the big thing going into the fall camp. Who's going to be the quarterback, him or Luke Altmaier? Talked about that last week with Jared Redding from 24/7, 247 Sports covering Ole Miss. But he also talked about changing our offense to a player, so maybe our offense won't look the same this year or next year, just adjusting to what players we have. He said both quarterbacks are young, not very experienced. He also got asked about tight end Michael Trick, who also come from USC, just like Jackson Dart. He talked about he has a very high ceiling. Tight end had 3 touchdowns in the spring game. He's going to be a weapon for whoever quarterback is going to be, especially down on the goal line. Really reminds me almost of a power forward boxing out and going after a rebound. Of course, the 4th down attempts, they come up, asking Lane Kiffin about that. There's a lot of his analytics, but it's also big about trusting your players, especially going out recruiting, letting your players know, hey, we're going to trust you. We're going to put you in situations where we trust that you will make the play. I thought it was very interesting. They had 49 4th down attempts in 2021. He's not a fan of the USC UCLA moving things because he's not a fan of all this movement for the rivalries, what fans love about college football. And I do agree with him on that standpoint because that's what makes college football different in the NFL. It's the tradition, the rivalries. That's what we expect out of this great sport. I like to call it a beautiful, chaotic sport, but that's what we expect. And with this movement, you're losing some of that. I mean, we are going to get Texas and Texas A&M back when Texas comes into the SEC, but you're also losing other rivalries there. You're going to lose rivalries in the Pac-12. So it's like we're sacrificing a lot of stuff. And Lane Kiffin didn't use that in these words, but we are sacrificing a lot of stuff for more money. For TV contracts, really is what it's boiling down to. And of course, he went in NIL, which I have said this repeatedly. Everybody was all over Saban for kind of calling out Jimbo Fisher on that a few months ago. Lane Kiffin was the first one to do it. He just didn't mention Jimbo by name. That's the only difference between him and Nick Saban and his coach. It's Nick Saban, like I said, the greatest coach of all time. But his thing with the NIL part of it, he said, the best, how you do well in NIL, have better boosters. So he's talking about having more money. And he went on to say, we basically legalize cheating in the sport. And people with the most money, get the best players now. So Lane Kiffin very opinionated on that. I feel like he wants a salary cap or something like that when you take his comments, what he has said. And a lot of coaches are like that. So, Lane Kiffin's not alone in that. Real quickly, Eli Drinkwitz, of course, the Missouri head coach. I think he's on the hot seat. I think Missouri has a bad year. He could be a guy that's fired. I think the 2 coaches on the hot seat going into this year are him and Brian Harsin, which we'll get into Brian Harsin next week. And I should have something for Last Word College Football later on this week, too, as well, when Auburn has their day at Media Days on Thursday. Eli Drinkwitz talked about the offensive line being the most experienced part of the team. Of course, quarterback position, you're going to have a battle. They have transfer Jack Abraham coming in. I think a lot of people expect him to be the guy, but we'll see what happens there. He did get asked about the Auburn game. That was intriguing to me. Look, Auburn writer, last word of college football. That was going to stick out to me. He said he had a great experience at Auburn. Of course, he coached under Gus Malzahn there. He also has coached under Brian Harsin when Brian Harsin was at Arkansas State. Learned lessons from Gus Malzahn and Gene Chizik that really molded him as a coach. He said, will be a real test for us because Brian Harsin's team to be physical, and that's going to be a big game for both teams because what I mentioned, I think those two coaches are on the hot seat coming in. Brian Harsin, every week is going to be a big game for him because he has to have an incredible season, I believe, to keep his job. But, I'll hold off on the Auburn and Brian Harsin stuff Monday on the podcast. Coach questions. Now, so I went to Facebook and Twitter, and luckily all these responses were coaches did not speak on Monday. So we can put this in here. I went to Facebook and Twitter, like I said, at P. Jordan SEC, and asked, what question would you like to ask your team's coach? So I got 5 responses. This is for Nick Saban at Alabama. Who do you think was the greatest football player to come from Alabama? That was Gene McCraney. That's my Aunt Jean. So I appreciate the question or the response. So I guess I'm going to answer what I think the coaches would say here, especially this one. I think Nick Saban will say Alabama has a great tradition of great players. It'd be hard to pinpoint one player. I know while I've been here, we have pride ourselves in having a lot of really good players that go through the process, blah, 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 blah. I think somewhere along that line is where Nick Saban would go with that response. Now, this one would be directed at Jimbo Fisher. This is interesting. Why did you lie, Jimbo Fisher, and get so mad at what Saban said when there was a video circulating that said you were doing what he said you were doing? And he puts the parentheses, run and duck for cover. That was Rhett Baxley. If somebody asked that to Jimbo, I think it would be very interesting because Jimbo will tell you what he thinks. He's not going to give you coach speak on that question. I can guarantee you that. Brian Harsin question. Now, we're going over to Twitter, so I got the Twitter handles right here. Will you have something that looks like an offense this year? That's from James S. at Auburn. One James, Uncle Jim, right there. With that question, that's a very good question. I would add. I mean, I don't know if a reporter would word it like that. They'd probably take a couple of words out of it and make it seem a little bit more friendly. But I do believe that is a viable question. I'd say the offense is going to be Tank Bigsby and then just whatever falls together. This is for Arkansas, Sam Pittman. What has it been like to see the resurgence of excitement in your 3 years in Fayetteville? Wes Pruitt, one of my colleagues at Last Word on College Football, his Twitter handle is at 4-Star Sports West. And yeah, I mean, where Arkansas was before Sam Pittman got there and where they are now is just incredible. Just a team for 2 years that couldn't win an SEC game, and now they could be a threat, a surprise team in this conference. KJ Jefferson at quarterback. Got to replace some players, obviously, at running back and receiver. But, man, this team has got it. They've got some good things going for them. So that would be a good question to ask Coach Pittman. I could see somebody asking that. And then finally, the last one comes from Kevin McGuffey, at Kevin McGuffey, another colleague at Last Word College Football who covers Kentucky for us. Is Christopher Rodriguez going to miss time this season? And if so, how long? And that'd be a big thing. If they don't have Christopher Rodriguez early in the year due to some issues he's had off the field, that'd be a big blow for Kentucky early on in the season. And I believe Christopher Rodriguez is one of the most underrated players in the conference. I have said that repeatedly. I honestly fully believe that. So Kentucky not having him, that would be a big blow for him and would put more pressure on Will Levis to live up to expectations also. I did have some pretty interesting news items come out on Monday as well when it pertains to college football. The Big 12 and Pac-12 talks end, and this comes from ESPN's Pete Thamel. Big 12 officials informed Pac-12 officials on Monday they're no longer interested in exploring the partnership. Wouldn't have generated much revenue for the Big 12. And a partnership is pretty much the only way the Pac-12 can survive. There's also been, I've seen talks float out there about an ACC Pac-12 partnership, and they would have a championship game in Las Vegas. I think that kind of fell apart too as well. Look, you heard me talking over Josh earlier in the show. I do not believe the Pac-12 is going to survive any of this. I believe the conference will cease to exist in the future. I don't see how it's going to work out for them. Your biggest media market is gone in USC and UCLA. Washington and Oregon, I feel like eventually will either be in the Big Ten or the Pac-12, Big 12. And then the other ones are going to get picked off, I think, by the Big 12 as well. Talked about it. The 2 Arizona schools, Colorado, Utah make a lot of sense. I think the 2 Arizona schools make sense too. So this is a big blow for the Pac-12. It's going to be interesting in a couple weeks when they have their media day. And it's media day. They just have the one day. But yeah, that's not good. That's not good for Pac-12. It's just kind of feel like for me, it's proving how I'm feeling that the Pac-12 is going to cease to exist at some point in the future. Staying in the Big 12, all Texas Tech football players signed 1-year, $25,000 NIL contracts. This comes from Lubbock Avalanche Journal's Don Williams. Each player signed a 1-year, $25,000 deal. The Matador Club, which is a Texas Tech alumni collective, NIL collective. And this is from Ariel Schaefer from KLBK News. This is led by former Red Raider Cody Campbell. So that's cool. I like this in NIL. Everybody's getting the same amount of money. There's not going to be any finger pointing or jealousy. I mean, it's all equal footing. And I think that's where we need to get to with NIL on this whole thing. Equal pay for all the players, kind of stay the same, then you don't have any issues. Then lastly, Notre Dame targeting $75 million annual media rights payout in quest to remain independent. This comes from Dennis Dodd over CBS Sports. Would remain independent if it can earn at least $75 million annually from NBC. That deal is set to expire in 2025. Obviously, Notre Dame wants to be paid like a Big Ten or SEC school, money-wise, with your media rights. Now, if NBC doesn't do this, then go the other direction. But they also talked about there, Josh told, and that was news to me when we recorded the conversation about the Big 12 NBC deal. So then if you bring in the Big 12, got all them in markets, and Houston is a big market. Yes, they're coming from a smaller conference, but UCF, another one, Cincinnati, they got all the good markets. So you can get a good TV deal with the Big 12, and maybe that could kind of help with Notre Dame with the money-wise. More money will be coming. I think that could actually tie in together and actually help out both situations. I'm not saying Notre Dame in the Big 12, but you have Notre Dame football. You also have the Big 12 sponsors, all that stuff. I just think that could bring in some more funds, and all that good stuff for NBC, the Big 12, Notre Dame, and could happen. But if Notre Dame's not able to get that from NBC, look for them to, I think, join the conference. Big Ten makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, you just go jump in the ACC, and that gives ACC a whole lot more credibility as a football conference if Notre Dame joins there. I don't think the SEC is going to happen, especially when you saw the comments Greg Sankey made at SEC Media Days Day 1, but who knows? We can all be surprised. But that kind of just seems where that's going. If NBC puts up the money, Notre Dame can stay independent, stay on NBC. If not, we might see Notre Dame finally join a conference in football. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this edition of Talking College Football. Once again, thanks to Josh Neighbors for joining the show. Had a lot of fun chatting with him. Kind of had a long segment there talking about SEC Media Day, Day 1. We're going to get into Days 2, 3, and 4 on Monday's show and the 2 days of ACC Media Day as well. So we're going to have a lot of stuff to cover and talk about on Monday's podcast. Like I said, there will not be another one this week here. I will have a pro football pod. Just follow me on Twitter at PJordanSEC. Drop that AFC East preview coming. Did the NFC East last week, doing the AFC East this week. On that podcast, my high school football podcast, the Wiregrass High School Football Report, will be returning very, very soon as well. As always, guys, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. Podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave me a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show, you can always email me at sports.phillipjordan@gmail.com and check out the show on YouTube over at the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel or on the Talking College Football with Phillip Jordan YouTube channel. Hope everybody has a great week. I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.